Well, we define populism, national populism, as being a movement that prioritises the culture and the interests of the nation state against an elite that populists argue is corrupt, self-serving and neglectful of the pure common people. So populism, I think, is a very distinct concept with its own tradition and history, going back a long way in democracy. It's not alien to democracy, it's deeply entwined in the evolution of democracy over the many centuries. And so it can be measured. We can look for a specific cluster of attitudes, anti-elite, anti-immigration, for example, and in some cases authoritarianism that we associate with this broad concept of populism. So I think there's a really big debate about what the key drivers of populism are. We've had a discussion with UBS today about the relative importance of economics versus culture, and I think it's fair to say that most social scientists would agree that it's both, that it's how they interplay and at what level. So I think, for example, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that political distrust is a key driver of support for national populism. People feeling that the system is not representative of their group. For example, if they're working class or they don't have a university degree, those groups are consistently more likely to vote for national populist parties. I think also there are profound concerns over immigration. Not only the level of immigration, but the pace of immigration. And that might not be at the local level, it could be at the national level, but it's very important to understanding the appeal of populism. And then I think thirdly, what's absolutely critical with regards to economics is that this is about a relative sense of deprivation. That I am losing out relative to another group in society, whether that's the more prosperous middle class, whether it's immigrants or minorities, and it's that sense of relative loss that leads me to feel deeply pessimistic about the future and to believe that the past was better than the present and that the present will probably be better than the future. And it's that notion of loss that I think is also a really important driver of support for populism. Well, I think we're going wrong in how we understand populism on a number of levels. I think we're very short term in how we're thinking about it. We're focusing only really on the here and now, what Donald Trump is tweeting, what happened during a campaign, was it Russia, what's Donald Trump saying. And I think actually we need to step back and look at the fact that we've got 30 years of evidence in social science that's looked at the drivers of support for populism from a very long-term perspective. The way in which people have become more concerned over issues like migration, the way in which our economies have developed in a way that have led certain groups to feel left behind, and the fact that many of our political systems have become less representative over a long period of time. So we need to start really looking at the longer term grievances, and then we need to think about how we're going to reply to those grievances, how we're going to respond to them. I think that's a much more interesting conversation to have than just talking about what happened last week. And if you look at, say, this conference, one of the nice things is you've got people from across disciplinary boundaries. So you need economists talking with political scientists, you need psychologists talking with sociologists, you need people in the policy sector talking with academics, and you need academics and policy people talking with business. The only way in which you're actually going to deal with populism seriously is if you're focusing on those deep-rooted grievances. That's the only way you can outflank populists. If we're obsessed with the individual leaders and what they're saying, I mean, that's an interesting conversation, but it's not a meaningful conversation. So I think it's about going deeper and thinking about how you tackle these inequalities and grievances in a way that doesn't necessarily lead us to obsess with the populace. Historically, populism was always more attractive to men. During the 1990s and 2000s, that led to a number of studies to talk about the gender gap in support for populism. But now it's clear that things might be starting to change, and we might have lost sight of a few things. Donald Trump won support among 53% of white women without a degree. There was no gender gap in support for Brexit. Marine Le Pen has been quite popular among young women, some of whom perhaps see her as being a divorced, professional, realistic woman. But what I think is absolutely clear is that we can no longer simply say that these parties are just full of old white men, which is effectively what people used to say, nor can we say these parties are just political protest parties, because there's an instrumental nature to their vote. People are voting for them because they actually want to see some of the policies that they're offering, lower migration, for example, or reforming the political system. So the good news is there's lots of research out there that we can use. The bad news is in our public debate, we haven't yet begun to really bring that in. And I think it's great to be having conferences where we're able to do that and start to actually challenge some of the stereotypes and narratives that are out there.